Hey guys, you may have heard the phrase that we like to use in the chess world, you got to study the classics. So today I'm going to show you a very old example and a very modern example that just took place a couple of days ago. Both of these have to do with the pawn endgames. So personally, I think that a chess player should begin studying pawn endgames pretty early on in their journey of learning chess. It basically is the foundation of all endgame play. It helps you understand all other kinds of endgames and shows you where you're trying to reach from the beginning of a game. And it's actually not that hard to get a pretty good grasp of pawn endgames. You need a handful of concepts that you understand, concepts, techniques. Once you get those, you will really be able to navigate your pawn endgames a lot better. So we're going to go to our first example. This is a study by the 6th world champion Mikhail Botvinnik based on a game that he'd played in 1952. And what's amazing about this position is that white is winning. Yes, despite the fact that white doesn't have any extra material, there are no passed pawns on the board, black's king is right by his pawns. White is actually going to win this endgame based primarily on his superior king. And so white begins the game with the move king d5. Well, that's very natural. You're going towards black's pawns. And black has a number of moves he can try here. There's king f6, king f8, various pawn moves. There's even a move king h6. Let's just take a look at the pawn moves. What they really wind up doing is weakening black's position. So white can go g5 here. Good principle is don't trade pawns unnecessarily. The less there are of them on the board, the closer you may be to some kind of a drawn endgame. So if you think that you're better, you generally want to keep pawns on the board. It gives you more opportunities to win your opponent's pawns. And so here, white is going to be using a very important technique called shouldering and zugzwang to be forcing his opponent's king to eventually abandon protecting his pawn. So this is zugzwang right here. Black has to move away from his pawn. So we use that a lot in pawn endgames. Now, if black goes with this pawn, of course, you don't want to take it, as that would just lead to a liquidation of pawns. So you would also be going past it with this move, and then we would be winding up in a position that we can also get after the move king f6. So for example, king f6, king d6, and g5. So we go f5. Black has to move the king. This king comes in. Black has to move either the pawn or the king. And in both cases, he winds up in zugzwang having to lose the pawn. And after king g8, f6, again, another situation of zugzwang. So moving the pawns for black is not a great strategy. Now, let's say he just moves the king back. That's it. We go here and here. And now we really want to play this move f5, but we have to time it right. Because if we time it right here, it's not going to work out because we're not going to be able to get black into zugzwang. Because here when we play f6, he goes forwards, not backwards. And then we're actually the ones in zugzwang and losing our pawn. So we have to maneuver around with our king a bit. And it's a little bit tricky, I would say, this position. So let's say king here. We can go king here, 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 right, there we go. And we make their king go up to g7, and then we push this move. And basically, black is in zugzwang. If he moves the pawn, he will lose it, and he's going to lose it on the 6th rank, which is winning for white. And if he goes to g8, f6, he's in zugzwang. So you see how prevalent are these themes of zugzwang in these endgames, right? The idea that eventually, like, you're going to have to move from the position you want to be in. Like, you'd rather just stay here forever, passing the turn, protecting your pawn, but you have to move, and your move is going to cost you the pawn. So that is what the superior side is able to get their opponent into a situation of zugzwang, where they're forced to play moves they don't want to do. Okay, so let's take a look at one more line here with king f8, king d6, king e8. And now the move f5. And it is pretty amazing here how white is actually winning this position. I mean, there's barely any material left, right? And how can white win this? Well, again, this idea that their king is better and their king is going to be able to come from the side doing that shouldering, or you can call it flanking technique, and basically force black into zugzwang yet again. Yeah, it's amazing. Just one pawn left, better king, and you win. So I think that's enough for these lines, guys. But it gives you a pretty good idea of how surprising it can be in a pawn endgame, where it looks like you barely have any advantage, just the better king, and yet it's enough to win this position. So I think Botvinnik, created a super beautiful and paradoxical kind of example, and very instructive for future generations of players. So now we're going to go to a more modern example. It was played just a couple of days ago in Weikanze, in the Tata Steel tournament, between Tabatabai, Grandmaster from Iran, and Thomas Beardson. Both of these players very high rated. Tabatabai is white. He's almost 2,700. Beardson is over 2,500. Beardson is black. So here we have a rook endgame. White could have considered putting the rook on the outpost and offering a trade of rooks in this way, but he just decided to trade. So I'm not really sure what he was going for here, because this does look very even. I don't know if white had any hopes of winning this endgame. I would think that not, but anyway, he did it. And here we go, right? So at this point in the game, it's not really clear what white wants. White doesn't really have a breakthrough with the king. I mean, when the king is there, you assume that the move h5 is white's only idea to sort of open things up on the king side, right? And black really should just sit and do nothing with the king. But instead, black makes this move. And this is quite a big shock to me, because it opens up this kind of invasion for the king, right? We already knew that h5 was an idea, and now you're just inviting it to happen. I'm not sure what black missed here. Maybe he thought he had g5, but of course white would just continue breaking in and winning back the pawn, again with a superior king. So black captured, white captured, and now you got to go back and defend your pawn. So is it possible the black thought this was a draw just because he's holding off white from taking on g7? Maybe. But you see, guys, as we know from Botvinnik's example, just because a king is protecting pawns at the moment doesn't mean you're going to hold this endgame. The question is, can we put black into zugzwang eventually? I'll tell you something really funny, guys. I played this out against one of my students, and he reached this position and then tried this move as white. Seems fairly innocuous, right? But then I got to use another very important idea of pawn endgames, the pawn breakthrough. And I played this move. I was like, wow, do I really have that opportunity to make a pass pawn like that? Believe it or not, black is winning with this move. I know, amazing. But the point is that, the d pawn is simply unstoppable. The white king cannot get to it. And if you take the other pawn, it is also unstoppable, because black's king is within reach of the white d pawn, and white's king cannot reach the d3 pawn. So, okay, yeah, that's not the way to go for white. Got to watch out for those tactical ideas. But white went g4. So all black can really do is stay in place with the king. If black attempts to play e5 here, we're just going to trade and win those pawns, right? They're not going anywhere. So king g8, f4. Okay, white's advancing and finally gets here. And starts, chipping away at the black pawn structure. So now black has two main ideas. He can either take our pawn or go f5. So if he goes f5, we are very lucky that we have this handy little pawn move, b3, forcing black to move. So you can call that a situation of zugzwang. We move in, and then we move to the back. And again, you can't move your king back because of this little problem. And if you move forward, I am just kind of flushing you out of there. Unfortunately, you're in zugzwang again, and you're going to lose the g7 pawn. So that's what happens if you play f5. So in the game, he took, and pawn takes, king here, king up here, and then you could play b3 or you could play g6 and then b3, and so white wins due to zugzwang. Yeah, you're going to hear that word a lot when we talk about pawn endgames, the situation of having to make a move but having no good moves to make, only damaging moves to your position, right? Because there's so few pieces left on the board that it's possible that you just won't have productive moves left to make. So yeah, I mean, it's in my mind, these examples separated by, about 70 years are really quite linked, right? The idea that you can win an endgame simply because your king is better, even when it looks like the opponent is still holding on, but you will be able to improve your position and eventually, through the help of zugzwang, to break down your opponent's defenses. So basically, the lesson is, guys, never underestimate the power of an active king in a king and pawn endgame. Like, that factor alone can single-handedly determine the result of the game.